The Grandview Apartments had been Marcus's inheritance, a crumbling 6-story building in the old quarter of the city that his uncle had left him, along with a mountain of debt. At 28, Marcus had imagined inheriting money, maybe a vintage car. Instead, he got 42 units, half of them vacant, and a building that groaned like an old man's knees every time the wind picked up. He moved into the ground floor manager's apartment on a grey October afternoon, his belongings fitting into just 7 boxes. The previous manager had quit without notice 3 weeks earlier, leaving only a cryptic note that Marcus found taped to the desk. "Don't rent 304, never 304. Marcus crumpled the note and tossed it in the trash. Superstitious nonsense. He had bills to pay and couldn't afford to leave a unit empty based on someone's paranoia. The first week passed uneventfully. He fixed a burst pipe in 201, dealt with Mrs. Chen's complaints about the heating, and placated Mr. Reeves when he threatened to call the health inspector about the mold in his bathroom. The building settled into a routine of minor disasters and petty grievances. Then came the knock on his door at 2 a.m. Marcus stumbled out of bed, pulling on a robe as he shuffled to the door. Through the peephole, he saw a woman. She was perhaps in her early 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun and pale skin that seemed to glow in the dim hallway light. She wore a grey dress that looked decades out of style. "I'm sorry to disturb you so late," she said when he opened the door, her voice soft and strangely flat. "My name is Eleanor Marsh. I'm interested in renting Unit 304. Marcus blinked sleep from his eyes. "It's 2 a.m. "I know. I work nights. This is my lunch break." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I can pay 6 months in advance. Cash. 6 months. That would cover the property taxes due at the end of the month." Marcus thought of the note in the trash, then pushed the thought away. "Let me get the keys." The elevator clanked and wheezed as they rode to the 3rd floor. Eleanor stood perfectly still, her hands folded in front of her, staring at the elevator doors without blinking. Marcus found himself watching her reflection in the scratched metal. Something about her stillness, unsettling. "Here we are," he said, unlocking 304. The door opened with a long creak that echoed down the empty hallway. The apartment was small, furnished with the same tired furniture that came with all the units. A kitchenette in one corner, a bathroom barely large enough to turn around in, and a main room with a Murphy bed that probably hadn't been used in 20 years. The single window looked out onto the brick wall of the building next door, leaving the room perpetually dim. Eleanor walked directly to the center of the room and stood there, turning slowly in a circle. "Perfect," she said. "I'll take it." "Don't you want to see the... It's perfect." She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope, thick with bills. 6 months, as promised. Marcus counted the money twice. It was all there, mostly in 20s and 10s, the bills soft with age. "I'll need you to fill out some paperwork." "Of course. Tomorrow evening, if that's acceptable. I need to get back to work." She handed him the keys. "I'll pick up a copy tomorrow." She was gone before he could respond, her footsteps silent on the hallway carpet. The next evening, Marcus waited in his office, but Eleanor never came. He called the number she'd written on the rental agreement, but it rang endlessly. No voicemail, no answer. He went up to 304 and knocked. No answer. He pressed his ear to the door and heard nothing. Probably working, he thought, and went back downstairs. The complaint started 3 days later. Mrs. Chen from 204, directly below 304, came to his office first. "Someone moving furniture up there," she said, her English broken by her thick accent. "All night, drag, 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 back and forth, no sleep." That night, he dreamed of the hallway outside 304. In his dream, he walked toward the door, but the hallway stretched longer and longer, the door receding into the distance. He could hear something behind the door. Not furniture moving, something else. A wet, sliding sound, like something being dragged through water. And a voice, Eleanor's voice, saying the same word over and over. Perfect, perfect, perfect. He woke with his sheets soaked in sweat. More complaints came. Mr. Reeves reported hearing footsteps pacing back and forth above him in 404. But 404 had been vacant for months. A young couple in 306 reported knocking on their wall. Always 3 knocks, always at 3:04 a.m. Marcus checked 304 every day. It remained empty, completely, impossibly empty. On the 7th night after Eleanor moved in, Marcus was woken by his door buzzer. He checked his phone. 3:04 a.m. Through the intercom, he heard breathing. Just breathing. Long and slow and wet. "Hello," he said. The breathing stopped. Then Eleanor's voice, cracked and strange. "I need you to come to 3:04. There's a problem with the apartment." "What kind of problem?" "I can't get out." Marcus pulled on clothes and grabbed his keys. The building was silent as he climbed the stairs, his footsteps echoing in the stairwell. The emergency lights cast everything in a sickly green glow. When he reached the 3rd floor, he saw the hallway was wrong. The walls were closer together than they should be. The ceiling hung lower. The perspective was skewed, as if he was looking at the hallway through a funhouse mirror. And all the doors were gone except for 3:04, which stood open, spilling darkness into the hall. "Eleanor," he called, "in here." Her voice came from inside the apartment, but it sounded far away, as if she was calling from the bottom of a well. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but his feet carried him forward. He stepped through the doorway of 3:04. The apartment was no longer empty. It was full of furniture, but not the furniture that had been there before. Victorian furniture, ancient and rotting. A chaise lounge covered in mouldy velvet. A wardrobe with a cracked mirror. A bed with stained sheets and a sagging mattress. And pictures on the walls, dozens of them, all showing the same building. His building, the Grandview. But in the pictures, it looked different. Older. Wrong. Eleanor stood in the center of the room exactly where she'd stood the first night. But she wasn't alone. There were others. 5 of them, maybe 6. Marcus couldn't tell because they seemed to flicker in and out of focus, their forms unstable, like images from a damaged film reel. They wore old-fashioned clothes, suits and dresses from different eras. Their faces were pale, their eyes dark hollows. "What is this?" Marcus whispered. Eleanor turned to look at him, and her face was wrong. The skin was too tight, pulled back too far, revealing too many teeth. "This is 3:04, she said. "It's always been 3:04. We've always been here." "That's not possible." One of the others spoke, a man in a 1940s suit. "Your uncle knew. That's why he never rented it. But you couldn't leave it alone." "The building needs us," said a woman in a Victorian dress, her voice like dry leaves. "We're part of its foundation, its bones. Every building has a heart, Eleanor said, stepping closer. A place where it lives. 304 is this building's heart, and we are its pulse. Marcus backed toward the door, but it was gone. The wall was solid behind him. Don't be afraid, Eleanor said, and her voice was almost kind. You can leave, but the room needs a tenant. It always needs a tenant. 6 is enough for now. We've had our time. The others began to fade, their forms dissolving into the shadows. Eleanor was the last to go. The note you found, she said, as her face began to blur. It didn't say, don't rent 304. Look at it again. Then she was gone, and Marcus was alone in the empty apartment. The furniture had vanished. The walls were the right distance apart. Everything was normal, except for the note in his hand. The note he'd thrown away, now somehow clutched in his fist. He opened it with trembling fingers. It didn't say, don't rent 304. It said, don't rent 304, never 304, unless you want out. Marcus ran. He ran down the 3 flights of stairs, stumbled into his apartment, and locked the door. He spent the rest of the night with every light on, jumping at every creak and groan of the building settling. When dawn finally came, he went back to 304. The door was there, solid and real. He unlocked it with shaking hands. The apartment was furnished again, exactly as it had been. The Murphy bed, the small table, the chairs, everything back in place. On the table was an envelope with 6 months' rent, cash, and a note in Eleanor's handwriting. Thank you for freeing us. The room is yours now, whenever you need it. We all need an exit, eventually. Marcus rented the apartment the next day to a graduate student who worked late at the library and needed a quiet place to sleep. The student never complained, never noticed anything unusual. Room 304 was just another apartment, but sometimes late at night, Marcus would stand in the hallway outside 304 and listen. He would hear nothing, but he would feel something. A pulse, a heartbeat, slow and steady, keeping time with the building's ancient rhythm. And he would remember Eleanor's final words, "We all need an exit eventually." He kept the note in his desk drawer, along with the keys to every apartment except one. The key to 304 hung on a hook by his door, always visible, always waiting, just in case he ever needed a place to disappear. The building groaned around him, settling into the night, and Marcus went back to his apartment. He locked the door, checked it twice, and tried not to think about the 6 faces he'd seen in that impossible room. 6 faces that had once been managers, tenants, owners, people who had found their way to 304 when they needed to vanish. Outside his window, the city lights flickered and dimmed. The Grandview apartment stood silent and dark, except for one window on the 3rd floor, room 304. And if you looked closely, if you really paid attention, you might see a shadow moving inside. Just one shadow pacing back and forth, waiting, always waiting. Because every building needs a heart, and every heart needs something to keep it beating. Marcus learned to live with the knowledge of 304. He learned not to rent it too quickly, not to ask too many questions when tenants came at odd hours asking about that specific unit. He learned to recognize the look in their eyes, the desperate need for an exit, a way out of whatever life had trapped them in. And sometimes, on the darkest nights, when the building groaned the loudest, he would stand in that 3rd floor hallway and wonder if his uncle had stood in the same spot, weighing the same options, considering the same impossible choice. The key to 304 remained on its hook by his door. Waiting, always waiting, just in case.